Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Hey there, welcome to today's episode with myself, Shane Craddock. And today, doing something slightly different, we're going to share an interview I did recently with Niamh Hannan, someone who is a dear friend of mine, but also a great professional and somebody who I think is going to give a different perspective, a valuable perspective on the inner edge, which is why we're all here. Now, before I do that, I just want to flag to you that my book launch is coming out on the 20th of October, but I'm giving something just to celebrate the launch for 7 days, starting the 13th of October, depending on when you're hearing this, called the Inside Track. It's 7 days of me sharing content via email that you won't get anywhere else. I'll be sharing some stories that made the book and didn't make the book. I'll be sharing a couple of tools. And if you join me in that particular 7 days, you'll also get access to a unique webinar that I'm calling Unleash Your Inner CEO, where I'm going to explain key basics of the inner CEO and use it as a launch tool for the book. So if you'd like to join me for some hidden gifts and things you won't get elsewhere, including I'm going to be doing some prizes given away on the webinar evening. And so all you got to do is opt in. And even if you can't make it, anybody who registers through that page will get a recording of the webinar, which will be valuable and could be fun. So if you want to do that, the link is in the show notes with this podcast episode. So on to today's guest. The person I want to introduce today, where we've had a really, what I think is there's some great nuggets in the interview that's about to come here, with a person who's a great professional and a good friend of mine called Niamh Hannan. Now Niamh, I've known, maybe 15, 16 years. Niamh is a professional coach, but what's interesting about Niamh is her background. She's also a chartered psychologist with the Psychological Society of Ireland. She's a very strong special interest in positive psychology, which includes a certification in a thing called emotional intelligence and also mindfulness. So she has great experience over a wide range of areas that I think you're going to find interesting, including being the trauma specialist for banks, where she would have been the person in Ireland anyway, if a bank was robbed, she was the professional brought in to try and help people get over the trauma of that experience. She's an expert in workplace well-being and has spoken at many conferences and to large companies, to their staff about looking after themselves. She ran a very successful private practice as a psychologist in South Dublin from 2004 to 2014, and she dealt with teens and adults, including men and women, and that gives her, I think, quite a unique perspective, especially on the inner edge. And she now runs her own business for the last few years as a coach. It's under Niamh Hannan, HANNAN.com, which I'll share in the show notes as well. You'll also hear us talk about something new that she's bringing to Ireland anyway, and I think it's quite new still internationally, called EMC, which is short for Emotional Connection Strategy. It's about a certain approach to improve relationships, both in a business context and also in any context, like when, of course, relationships are part of life. So who doesn't want to improve that? She was the chairperson of the board of directors for Teen Line Ireland, great organization. And yeah, she's just a dear, dear friend who I've known for, as I say, many years. And what you're going to hear, we're going to land straight into a conversation that was recorded between myself and Niamh. You'll hear me asking different questions. And I think you're going to find, probably in a surprising way, some of the stuff here and ideas that I think will benefit you. And I think it's no harm to hear it from a different voice. Niamh is known as the Soulful Psychologist. And hopefully by the end of the interview, you'll understand more why she's called that. So let's get into this conversation with Niamh Hannan. Niamh Hannan, welcome to the Inner Edge.
Thank you, Shane. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great finally to have you here. This is something that has been an idea for a while, and I thought it's a great opportunity to get your valued insight from the wide range of experience that you've had on, I guess what I would call a lot of it is to do with inner work. So what I'm curious about, first of all, if somebody is listening in and if they don't know you yet, if I was to say to you, well, where did you start in your career and how did it evolve to what you're doing now? So that's an easy question, Niamh, to start with, nice and short.
Yeah. I know the answer to this one. Woo! So I'm a chartered psychologist, and actually I would have started seeing my first clients this time. Well, it was this time of year in 1999. So 24 years.
Okay.
So I started off counselling, and I would have been counselling for 20 years. And so in July 2019, then I closed down my private practice and moved out of that and retrained in coaching. Side by side with the one-to-one work, Shane, I've always worked with organizations as well. So I've had different interests at different times, but I've always done lots of talks, workshops, trainings, and so on with organizations because I like to keep things interesting. So I've always had a few different things kind of going on.
Yeah.
So then I suppose what happened is that when I obviously preempted COVID by kind of shutting up shop in 2019 and just finished my, kind of upgrading in my training in January, February 2020, and then lockdowns happened.
Yeah, so hold for a second. So I've got a couple of questions there. The first one is,
okay.
What took you into psychology in the first place? Like, why did that interest you? Or how did that happen?
It's a good question. So I suppose when I was in school, even, well, probably a couple of factors. My mum was always really good at, even from a young age, when we come in from school and you'd had a bad day or you're upset about something, you mightn't even have realized or joined the dots that something had happened in school and that's why I was in a mood. But she would sit us on her knee and get it out of us and help us to join the dots. So there was that, I suppose, emotional support there. And she became a counsellor for Accord, which was it was pre-marriage counselling at the time.
Yeah.
So there was that kind of familiarity with that approach, I suppose, to life. The other thing that happened during my teenage years is that, different friends lost a parent at a very vulnerable age. And one of my friends lost a parent by suicide. And that had a huge impact on me and on everybody in a very wide circle. And it taught me from a young age that and the phrase that really stuck in my head for me was that there's a history behind every face. And I know nothing about what's going on in other people's lives. You could be sitting beside somebody in class all year and not know what's really going on for them. And it's the same in the office. And that really struck me. And I suppose I've always kind of had an interest in that. So now, having said that, I wasn't clear when I was in college that I wanted to do psychology, because back in the late 80s and early 90s, I didn't even know what psychology was. I didn't know anybody who had done it, really. And from a very young age, I had been interested in medicine, in fact. So as a kid growing up, and as a little girl growing up in the 70s, I wanted to be a nurse. At some point, I learned that girls could be doctors too, because all the books had the men as doctors and the women as nurses. Yeah. And while nursing is a very valuable profession, at that point I wanted the white coat and the stethoscope as well. So I set my sights on medicine. So all through secondary school, I was really intent on medicine. And it's interesting because as we're recording this, actually, the college offer places come out today. And the Leaving Cert results are very recent. So when I got my leaving results, everybody thought it was a dead cert that I'd be a doctor. And when the offers came out, I didn't get medicine. I didn't get my first three choices, I think. And so when I had been filling out those forms, I knew that that I was doing my utmost first time around in the leaving cert to get medicine. And that if I didn't get it, I wasn't going to repeat. I took it that it was almost like a message from the powers that be to do something different. I put my all into it, gave it 100%. And if that still failed, then don't go at it again, Niamh, do something else. And so the something else, I had no clue. I just knew that my languages were where my A's were going to be. So I paired things off with languages. And one of the pairings was psychology with French. And I didn't even get that because on random selection, I wasn't selected. Okay, so I started off. This is a longer story than you expected.
Yeah.
I started.
Well, I didn't notice about you. So you kind of ended up in psychology, almost kind of a starting point was almost like by a mistake, almost, or it wasn't quite designed by your mind.
Almost, or you could say that I knew nothing about where I was going, and something was steering me into it. Because I actually started off. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
So I'm from Cavan originally. You might not know that by the accent, but a lot of Cavan people would have gone to Galway to college. So I actually got offered a place in Galway. I would have been doing arts. I got a place in campus. There were loads of people I knew. Galway was mega friendly. You go in the first week, I think it was like orientation week, and then there's fresher week, and everybody's chatting to everybody. It's party on from the day you go in there. And 2 weeks into Galway, I got a phone call from Trinity that I had missed out on random selection in the first round, and somebody didn't take up a place, and now my name came up randomly selected to study psychology and French in Trinity. And the only reason that I was willing to move from Galway to Trinity at that point was because in Galway in arts at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but you would be choosing maybe 4 subjects in first year. There were hundreds doing psychology in first year. Only 26 would get in at the end of the year. So I had no guarantee that I would get to psychology, and I didn't want to be doing like 2 languages or something with archaeology or some subject that I didn't have the same interest in.
So hold on. So listen, there's 1,000 questions I could ask you from that, right? But actually, let's go on one that I didn't really plan, which was when you're saying, and I just think because I think there's something in this for everybody in terms of guidance, or you said there was something else steering me. So what is that thing that you think is steering, that might be steering?
Yeah, I suppose at the time I probably would have maybe called that like God. Now my language might be more like life, the universe, a higher force, as such, a sense or something even inside myself that inner wisdom that I couldn't get through to my thick skull, that Niamh, psychology is the path for you. Like once I got into psychology, I knew this is where I'm meant to be. I had no regrets about missing out on medicine. I mean, I was devastated when I didn't get the offer for medicine initially. But once I got into psychology, there were no regrets. It's like, this is where I'm meant to be. I could see, and I knew even in college, in my undergrad, that I wanted to go on and do, master's or PhD or whatever in either counselling or clinical psychology, but that was my area of interest.
So it makes more sense to me now, and we'll come to this in a minute in terms of your brand at the moment is the Soulful Psychologist. So I guess that kind of makes more sense in that context. You kind of that encapsulates the journey as you got into psychology. There was something else steering. In a way, you're almost saying, what I'm hearing anyway, is that inner wisdom, maybe the soul element or whatever we want to call it. It's that element coming in as well. So that makes more sense to me now. Again, like lots of questions, but if I just zone in on a couple of things, I know, for example, that you specialized for a good while in trauma and helping people get over trauma. So for a long time, one of the things I was always curious about was that if a bank, one of the major banks, was your customer, if they were robbed, you would be called in to help. I don't know what the word is, whether it's debrief or counsel the people in the bank who were faced maybe at gunpoint or whatever else. Just curious, just talk a little bit about that. Like what was your approach there, or even what did you learn from that? Quite a specialized thing.
So, and so back in about 2004, I learned of this, and what it was at the time was called Critical Incident Stress Management, CISM, and that was the evidence-based approach at that time. over the years that came under scrutiny, that approach, and the process came under scrutiny. And so I retrained then in what, according to new evidence, was the new way of doing things, which is psychological first aid. But you're right, I would have been called into banks or, after different traumatic events, a critical incident, essentially, I would have been called in within kind of 48 hours, usually. Very often I get a phone call today, can you come in tomorrow? And you had to be prepared to drop everything. And my other clients needed to know that I could be called to do that. Some of the work, and I still would occasionally get a call from a company like today, and it's not bank raids anymore. It's often sudden death or suicide of a colleague in the workplace, or it may be a workplace-related death or injury, or if there's mass redundancies happening, for example. They're the kind of incidents that people would, like me, would get called in for today.
And I'm just curious, I just think nothing is ever wasted. So, and we're going to come to this now in a minute in terms of your work with leaders, because obviously, as you said earlier on, you kind of use the COVID time as a time to maybe transition from the counseling, psychological support into more of the coaching leadership area, right? But if you're looking back, what do you think the trauma experience and also the counseling, psychological experience of dealing with people one-to-one, and I know you did groups as well, but then you transitioned to leadership. What did you take from that time to bring it into leadership that's relevant?
I think, and I suppose that what that background has given me is skills in really listening to a person under, I don't necessarily mean underneath what they're saying, but there's you're reading into, but also the ability to create a safe space, actually, so that people can open up and be their real self, their whole self, so that it's not just the happy facade or the look at him, how amazing I am, or whatever might be presented to the world normally. I'm interested in getting to know what's really going on with you. And it's that inner game, really, that, in the language that you use, Shane, I suppose my motivation has never been just to work on the surface and teach you lots of skills to make you more amazing and get you that promotion. While lots of people might come to me to build those skills, my real interest lies in going under the hood and who are you and what's the essence of you, so that when you recognize that, then you bring that out into the world, and that's what gets you the promotion or whatever else you want to do or go for. But I also want to make sure that, if you are going for the promotion, it's not just because it's the next step or it's the obvious thing or it's what you should do. I want to make sure, well, are you in alignment for this? Does this feel right for you? Or are you doing it because other people think you should do it? Or do you think that's what's going to make you happy or give you the magic, be a magic wand for you? So I like working with the essence of people. And I think that experience, both through counseling and through trauma, it means that when people come to me, they're in a vulnerable place, and I can create a lot of safety very quickly for somebody to allow themselves to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability actually is what allows for transformation. So when we allow ourselves to go to those vulnerable places, that's when change can happen. That's when growth can really happen. And that's what I love to work with, that growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So with your work now, how would you describe the kind of leaders and organizations that you work with? Like, who are your ideal people that you work with?
I guess that's evolving still for me. But usually I like to work with people who, first of all, have that interest in their own personal growth as well as professional growth. So that openness. And it's almost like some of the work that I do would be in emotional intelligence, and I often would use an emotional intelligence assessment at the beginning of a coaching contract with the client, particularly when they're coming about something work-related. And one of the measures in that is, that kind of self-actualization is what it's termed, and that interest or that motivation to develop yourself as a person as well as professionally. And it's almost like, You have it or you don't. People either, and you're not really going to go to coaching unless you have that, unless you're a little bit of a self-actualizer, and you might be sent, of course. But if that's not there, then somebody isn't going to have that same interest and motivation. So I love to work with people who have that interest and motivation. And a lot of my group work, it is about kind of doing that work. We're always building self-awareness, and that you're growing as a person, because that's what you bring to your leadership then. It's not the skills that you slap out. It's who you are and how you are and the state that you can maintain and how you communicate and the relationships that you build. And all of that comes back to, if you want to change anything, your first step is self-awareness and becoming aware of where things are currently, and then where do you want to move them to.
And what do you see, Niamh, in that kind of work? What do you see as the main challenges? Like what are you seeing being presented with the leaders that you're talking with? What are their main challenges?
Yeah, I suppose just kind of, you could almost break it down into different groups or different reasons that people come to me. Sometimes maybe, women in particular might come with confidence issues. It's still quite a thing, I guess, that, whether, and it's for different reasons, that maybe return after maternity leave or whatever, the confidence is going to be low. So confidence can be quite a common one. Another one would be often, say, leaders who've got to a certain level. They've climbed the ladder. They might be, they have the nice financial income at this point, and they don't necessarily like the view from the top, or they've got to that point, and now there's almost like, oh, is this it? Like, is this it? I thought I would get more out of it being here, and I'm not sure I want to keep doing this for the next 10 or 15 years, or how long it is till their retirement. So that kind of search for meaning and search for fulfillment. And I found that actually, I think COVID accelerated that. I think people had a taste of, stepping out of the norm during COVID and maybe getting some perspective. And life did slow down hugely for us during COVID. And I know a lot of people worked a lot of hours online, but you weren't running your kids to every activity because there was nothing on. You weren't going out socially because you couldn't. There was nothing else. And I think it forced people to slow down, and they got some perspective. And I think there was an acceleration in that kind of like self-examination even, and am I where I want to be? Do I really want to step back into that when the world speeds back up again? How do I want things to be? And it maybe shone a little bit of a microscope on, for people on where they're not happy, or where that gap was for them. So they would be some of the key areas, I guess. Within organizations too, sometimes the issues that can be coming to me maybe in coaching can be maybe more specifically culture related. For example, working with maybe government departments or public service type thing, one of the common issues is that loss of knowledge, the knowledge drain when there's a turnover, so and the stress and that maybe leaves for the people who are left behind, trying to bring expertise to a subject that they might not have expertise on. And because I've had the public service, very often what happens there is they're moved from within completely different departments, and so they have to learn from scratch. So there's different things that, depending on cultures and
just curious on that. Obviously, we're friends, we're colleagues, we would talk all the time about different things, but I'm just curious. I think I know the answer from your perspective, but I don't want to make the assumption I'm going to ask you. Like, do you think stress in organizations or in business in general, is it the same as it was 5 years ago? Has it gone down? Has it gone up? What do you think it is? Up? Yeah.
Up. This year, I think my observation is that this year has been different in lots of ways, I think, than previous years. And I mean, obviously, when COVID happened, there was such a fear response. It was so unlike anything that we'd ever experienced before, that there was a massive fear response. And there was a huge adaptation as people adapted to working from home and working on a screen, and very often were being onboarded and all that. So there was very high stress that was paid attention to in the workplace, perhaps for the first time.
Yeah.
And since COVID, it's like everything, there's a new hybrid approach. So that's a new adaptation and more change for people. But things have sped up to, are we going to rotate off our axis? Because like the earth's just going to, it's like it's spinning out of control. Everybody is so busy and moving so fast. And
no, it's a good way of saying it, because, well, I mean, obviously the earth, as far as I'm aware, is still doing the speed that it does, is suspended in space. But if you're a human, it does seem to me as well, that's my take, is that the business factor for humans is just gone off the scale over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
I for me, looking at it the same as you there, probably I think it's the worst it's ever been that I've ever seen it. And I always think, oh no, at some point it's going to slow down. You think, okay, we've got the lessons from COVID, we're seeing a different way. This is going to be the chance for change and a new approach, a new model. And then you realize, oh, maybe it's true. Old habits die hard. And it's just getting worse.
I feel like during COVID, like say in 2020, once it became clear that this isn't going away in a few weeks, and we were heading into the winter, in the second half of 2020, I did about 50 webinars for different companies on well-being, on coping, on trying to stay well through COVID, on working from home and creating boundaries and all of that stuff. And I feel like I was preaching about, we need to learn from this and remember this for when the world opens back up again.
I hear you.
And it's actually worse than before. I'd agree.
Yeah,
it's just accelerated.
I won't. There's an obvious kind of question there as well. Why do we think that's the case? But let's not get into that, because I think that's probably a dedicated episode by itself, right? A long one.
It could be a rabbit hole. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it is a rabbit hole. But let's talk a bit about a phrase that you've introduced to me called emotional connection work. And I know that this is kind of something that you're pioneering in Ireland. So you're bringing kind of a new model, a new approach into Ireland. You're the first person to kind of do this particular type of work. Can you just explain to the people listening just exactly what it is and why does it matter?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I was approached by Dr. Lola Gershfield, who's in like West Coast USA. Because with my skill set and my background, she thought that I could be a good match for the work that she has done. And so she's done a huge amount of research. She has an advisory board and researchers who have been working on this for years. She has written several books on this. And she has an evidence-based process, really, called EMC, emotional connection. And what it is it's a very structured process to help people to reconnect and to rebuild and to repair the bond in any kind of work relationship in particular she's focused on after a disconnect. So I suppose, it's based on her study of attachment theory as well as other approaches, but the biggest resource for human beings is emotional connection with other people. And when we experience emotional disconnect, we are stressed and distressed, and that impacts on our performance and on our ability to do work. And so when we work with somebody, we depend on them to a certain extent. And if you've got, like, for example, an employee-manager relationship, and if there's a good emotional connection, then things tend to go smoothly and the employee tends to be engaged and the manager feels good about the work that they're doing too. And it goes into a positive cycle. But when something happens that creates a disconnect, very often you'll get somebody who withdraws, and the other person might be trying to fight for that relationship, and we call them the pursuer as such. So they're like, we need to meet, we need to talk, and the other person is maybe for whatever reason feeling overwhelmed, or like, just I can't handle this, or there's a lot of emotions involved. Traditionally in the workplace, emotions have been ignored. It's, for a long time, it was believed that the workplace is no place for emotions.
Absolutely.
With the work, with the work of emotional intelligence, and from Daniel Goleman right through, that understanding has changed. But I don't think people really had a process. Like, if you want to build your emotional intelligence, how do you do that? If I want to repair the relationship, how do I do that? And the only kind of thing that I've seen out there, and I studied it myself years ago, was mediation. And very often when mediation is taking place, the conflict has already gone to a really bad place. And the focus in mediation is on the content. What is the content of this argument, and let's see if we can reach an agreement about
not the resolution behind it in terms of the people, the emotions, and the relations within that.
Exactly. There's often no repair of the relationship.
So in essence, what it is, it's a process for repairing relationships to a good level.
The bond. Exactly.
Obviously you're talking about emotional intelligence, that inner intelligence. I mean, it's gained a lot of traction over recent years. As you said, it's not, we're coming from a background maybe male dominated, where it's like, we don't show emotions. That is changing. They're seen as there's a lot of value now, huge value in understanding that emotional intelligence. Excuse me. So is this for men and women? Is it for women only? Is it for men?
Oh no, it's for everybody. It's for everybody. Absolutely, 100%. Because that breakdown in communication happens everywhere.
Yes.
I mean, I'm married. It happens between myself and my husband, and then we have to repair that. But we're invested in repairing that because we've made a commitment to each other, and we're invested in repairing those kind of discords or disconnects with our kids. But in work, while you might really care, there's also, I suppose, a fear. Like, for example, sometimes when we don't express emotions well, and we don't know how to do that in the workplace. I mean, I think we really don't know how to do that in the workplace. We don't know how to be vulnerable. We've got all this research and Brené Brown telling us how important it is.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? And very often there isn't the safety. So the first step in this is creating safety so that then you can be vulnerable, and it's giving people the language and the process. And that creates a huge amount of safety in itself because it's very structured, and you're helping people to move through this. And there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that they come out the other side having repaired that relationship. But also then I will be teaching people the process themselves so that they can continue to use that, not just for that disconnect, but for any disconnect that happens in the future. So you have a set of skills.
Brilliant.
And that can then spread kind of organization wide, really. Or it would start with the top, though, that
it kind of goes back to it goes back to the very start of our conversation. We were saying, about seeing there's a history behind the face, and obviously there's a lot more behind the face. And that goes back to your point and about leaders, what's really going on. As you say, you're trying to kind of get down to the truth, like what's actually going on. So, and I think anybody listening to this, we're all the same insofar as that, some people are good at masking their emotions. Unfortunately, particularly I think in the corporate environment, we're conditioned, or people have been conditioned to kind of just put up the nice, brave face, but underneath I might be suffering in silence. And I can see the value of what you're talking about, that if there's a kind of defined process that you could actually help somebody say, okay, here's the process to actually help repair this relationship. So now I can just follow that. I can see that. I can see massive value. I'm going to change tack slightly, if that's okay, unless there's something. Did you want to add something to that?
Well, I guess a couple of little points. Yeah. First, that even though emotional intelligence has been recognized more and more over recent years, some of that is still at a theoretical or kind of lip service level. It's not necessarily being integrated into the workplace. People aren't being promoted for their emotional intelligence yet. So there's still that piece, and I guess the other piece is that that these disconnects can happen, over all sorts of little things, little misunderstandings, little miscommunications, little resentments and hurts and grudges, and And there may, and if two people don't talk about that in a way that's helpful and that's safe, then what tends to happen is that, some of it is nearly made up in a person's head, and you'll never know the truth of it because you've got two different perspectives who aren't willing to go there because they don't feel safe. And particularly where there's maybe a hierarchical, if you've got an employee and a manager, it's very difficult for an employee to safely challenge their manager or talk to them about that emotionally. And very often the manager cares about the employee but doesn't have the skills. And this is about giving people the skills to have that conversation, to repair the bond.
Niamh, if somebody's listening to this now, I know you mentioned it was from, I couldn't pronounce the name of the woman, but would you direct them to your website or to maybe this woman's book if they're interested in even exploring more about that? Where would you direct them?
So I'd say just get in touch with me, send me an email, set up a phone call, a Zoom call or whatever, because what I'm going to be offering some free webinars on this to help to educate people about it, I suppose, and for people to understand more about it. So that way, then they can see, is this something that I might be interested in for my organization, or for my board, or for my, leadership team, for example. So it'll be, available at different levels, but a free webinar is a good way to start, I think, for people, for information. I could do one for an organization and have a conversation with them about.
Well, I have a few more questions to ask you, but before I do that, just very quickly, what is your email?
Niamh at niamhhannan.com. And the Hannan is Hannan.
Hannan. Grand. We'll repeat that at the end as well. So a couple of
my website is niamhhannan.com, so they'll find out lots about me on that, but it's not updated. It's not really on there yet.
Yeah, okay. Email is best for the moment. I just made up a thing as we were talking. It just kind of came to mind. I'm going to call it the 3x3, right? So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to give me, off the top of your head, straight from the gut/soul, 3 answers. Okay. So the first question is, what are 3 things that leaders can do more of to improve from an inner context? So what are 3 things leaders can do more of to improve from an inner context?
The first one that comes to mind is mindfulness or meditation.
Okay, actually. Brilliant. Yeah.
As a practice. And I don't mean just picking up an app and kind of putting aside 10 minutes, which is fantastic. But I think the whole mindfulness approach and learning a little bit more about the actual mindset behind it, even, and the understanding the approach is really, really beneficial. And that will grow. The second piece, I suppose, would be kind of growing your self-awareness. Mindfulness will help you do that. So because you're making time for that reflection, for observing yourself and learning to accept as well, which is a huge part of the journey and will be a lifelong thing.
I know what you mean by that, but let's just pretend somebody's listening who's listening to hearing that for the first time. What do you mean by accept?
Okay, so in a nutshell, if I was to use one sentence for the mindfulness approach, it is, let's see if I can begin to accept whatever it is that I'm experiencing in this moment. Okay, so it's, let's see, is that kind of experimental mindset, curiosity. If I can begin, so that beginner's mindset, you're not looking to be an expert at this, you're not looking to do an amazing meditation and transcend, become enlightened. It's just, so that's the mindset you're going in with, to accept. And like, say, for example, you have a headache. It can be, we fight that, we resist that. Or you've just had, you just had criticism from your lovely wife this morning, Shane. She gave out to you for something.
Nothing to criticize. What are you talking about? Don't be putting ideas in my head. There's nothing to criticize here. Please put the attention.
Well, that's why I won't give any examples, because I couldn't think of any. But
okay, no, you said that. That really succinctly. I like that description of accept. I think that's very clear, the way you described that as a sentence. I'm going to give you the second question. It's kind of linked, but what should organizations do? Give me 3 things that organizations should do more of from an inner context. So
linked with the emotional connection work that I'm doing, organizations need to begin to open up to focusing on emotions and emotional connections and bonds between people, because we know statistically and from all the research that engagement is at a seriously low rate. We know that people are stressed out, burning out, sick, dropping out like flies, mass resignation, all of that thing, movement happening. People stay when they have good relationships, even if they're not mad about the job, actually. If they have good working relationships, if they like their boss, if they like the people that they're working with, and they feel engaged and they feel like they have safe, emotional connections with those people, they might happily work away at that job for a lifetime. Those bonds are so important. And when that goes wrong, it doesn't matter how much the person likes the work itself, they will be gone. They cannot stay in that because it's too stressful to the human being, because we need those communications,
so you're saying
connections.
Invest in the emotional connections and that work to help your people to get better at that. Yes.
And invest in your leaders. I mean, coming back to the EQ, the emotional intelligence, invest in, their people skills, their emotional skills, so that they are then creating that culture from the top down, and that then sets things up. That hasn't been valued at the bottom line, I think, and yet that, all the research is showing that this is the stuff that affects your bottom line, because it impacts hugely on performance. Think of anybody who has talked about a difficult relationship at work. When there's a disconnect, they're stressed, they're distressed, they're distracted at work, their performance is going to be down, somebody's not speaking to me, or you think that they're speaking to somebody else about you. It's nearly all you can think about. It's very difficult to perform, so, and a manager managing that, it's like they don't necessarily know what way to turn. It just ends up in this negative cycle, and the negative cycle takes over the relationship, and that takes over your capacity for work. So organizations need to pay more attention to emotions and to emotional connection, really, and to start that from the top down.
Okay, great. Love it. Last question then of the three, what do I call it? The 3x3, right? So the last question is, right, with regards to you, could you share 3 things that you do to cultivate your own inner game?
Yeah, and Shane, this is something that at one point I remember being kind of introduced as the boss of self-care, because self-care has always been a big area for me. I've worked, in mental health and well-being for over 20 years, and yet it's something that, when I come across my own obstacles in life or tough times, I always have to find a way to nearly up my game. So you can never really get complacent with this. So for me, one of the things that I've learned and got into the habit of that really impacts me positively is I go for a walk with the dog every morning, and that sets me up nicely for the day. I would also listen to a guided meditation or do a silent meditation every night in bed, actually. So that helps me kind of wind down and relax rather than staying awake with a busy mind. So it sends me into a better sleep. So they're 2 really key things. Making time for myself. Like for me, my friends, my relationships are, we know research wise, I'm not alone in this. This is everybody. We all need it, but I certainly recognize it in my life as I make time. I made time at lunchtime today, hooked up with a friend, went for a little walk. And that resets me. And that's what kept me sane during COVID as well, was, being able just to meet a friend for a walk once a week. So it's making that time for the people in your life who are really important to you, for those connections, because actually that boosts you and keeps you going.
Brilliant. Right. Well, look, that's been fantastic. Lots of information and thought-provoking stuff there, Niamh. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
We'll see. We might have you on again, maybe for some rabbit hole discussions on deeper topics.
Get deep and philosophical there. Yeah. We'll solve the problems of the world between us, Shane.
Well, we can try. We can certainly try. All right, Niamh, thank you.
Thank you, Shane. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So that was Niamh Hannan. I hope you got some good food for thought in that conversation. I thought there was plenty in it. Just to close out, again, a reminder, if you'd like to get involved in my launch week, where I'm going to be sharing some goodies, some tools, some information, some stories, all by email, just join me, register at the webpage. The link is in the show notes here, but it's also, the URL is theinnerceo.com/stay-updated. theinnerceo.com/stay-updated. The link is in the show notes anyway. Other than that, I hope you have a great week, and that's it. Ciao for now.